All right, to the morning, right? So, what is this video entitled? And this is part of a series here of a few things. The few things happen to be about violence. So, what is this episode entitled? It is like yesterday and the day before. Yeah, the day before was yesterday. Was about why gunshot victims cannot be solved by God, obviously. The day after that, and I mean, it could be a 6-part episode, who knows? The next one after that, yesterday, was about gunshot victims. Should they be allowed to drive? And a lot of these things just don't make sense to people as they are insane or unrealistic. But we've been explaining last episode or the last live was about 2 hours and 40 minutes to explain or discuss why mass shooting victims should drive. And we came out with a quartile of like 2.4, if you can remember, or something, out of 39 divided by the amount 13 or something. So we kind of figured, it is within the quartile range for them to drive. So we got that information. We figured, it is real, but then it's also based on the systematic, notion, which we didn't really solve. We kind of looked into. Okay, so this third episode is entitled, "What Does It Mean to Be an Undocumented, Unofficial, or Unofficial Mass Shooting Victim?" Okay. Obviously, there are no takers. This live is pretty much empty, but it is for the basically history books of why not? If basically you could never solve a question that could never be answered, why would you not ask the question? And it goes into the, I suppose, the reality behind the question itself. So let's ask the question, rephrase the question. What does it mean to be an undocumented, unofficial mass shooting victim? There's probably around some of the roughest questions or answers you can come up with in any existential way, I suppose, or some of the top at least. And then, there's just a question of, what it is. So we perfectly can define it as, what does it mean to be an undocumented, unofficial mass shooting victim? It means that you don't have the information on file in front of you. You can't grab the file, but hold on. You can, in a way, because there could be sources, there could be the workaround of the scene, there could be many, many things, as much as a lawyer could argue in court against a homicide trial, or in a homicide trial, even with evidence that is photographic or DNA related. This is exactly the same thing. And I could, explain it to you, and I could say, hey, just because it means the unofficial, undocumented, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that person has the right to say, such and such, or, it's not relatable to the law, right? I mean, it's a real thing, right? Unofficial, undocumented mass shooting victim. And are they the same thing? I mean, your mind goes from one place to the other when you automatically hear, or rightfully hear, or hear the conversation that's constantly nagging in your darn mind, or your question saying, I didn't even know this existed, or I want to learn more about it, right? So I'm no specialist in the matter, but I can tell you one thing after another. I mean, even if with experience, or with the daunting fact of questioning the idea of who a mass shooting victim is, or the settling fact of what a mass shooting is, or perhaps the perception or the audience behind, or the channel behind what it means to view or see or experience a mass shooting. And as daunting as a fact as it is, you have to ask your question here: is it cogent? Is it a reality beyond an example or sample? I mean, it's a pool of information. Were these things connected? Were these things connected to begin with? There's not just one mass shooting nowadays. It's been 5 every 15 weeks or something. So the exact, idea isn't, as believable in your mind of, my gosh, that's terrorist, or my gosh, that's terrible, right? I could have helped that person in so many ways to show some empathy towards the world they're in. It doesn't always have to be the ladies if you're in the guys' world, or if you're the girls' world. It doesn't always have to be about the guys, but the reality there is there's something in the maybe hearts, or something in the mind speaking. It's not always about drugs. I'm sure, possibly somebody out there had, taken their fair share of NyQuil in the night and kind of freaked out during the day and said, I had enough is enough, right? So, I mean, the same question you go partying at sea, drunk, but, obviously drinking is not good. I'm not a drinker. Drinking will do nothing for you. Drugs will do nothing for you as well. So, the particulars about this question are daunting again, and there isn't a lot of a word, large amount of words for this question. I mean, daunting, exacting. Gosh, I mean, I'm cluttered, or I am stunted at what kind of words I could use to explain this question. Undocumented, unofficial mass shooting victim. It's almost like it's a priority of the concept itself. I mean, is this a concept? Is this a priority of reality, a rationalization? I mean, those don't even make sense without a sample example or a population right there. So the daunting fact, or the exacting fact, or the unofficial fact in that way, or that matter, and I mean, which is now an exaggeration, is about the maybe policy, maybe about the makeover of the reality of safety, right? If nobody could lock doors ever, could they ever lock doors, right? The same as for a filing cabinet, but right off the bat, I will say A plus for me. But I'll say, yes, you have to have the file cabinet locked, or you wouldn't have an official purpose, right? So the principle goes and stays the same for anything at any time. But what if you look at the program behind the program? What if everything in the program was shuttered? It said one thing versus the other. It's deceptive. It doesn't really make sense. It's kind of screwy. The system doesn't work, and I owe you a lot of money for a lot of nothing, right? So that's a good question, right? I mean, don't add snake oil to a bad wound, or don't add, as an adult you learn, don't add, double the amount of, a painkiller, but like, acids or alcohols to your wound, or you're going to burn your skin. And as they put it, they use the beep word. Don't add beep to the cut or to the wound, right? Same for a mass shooting. You start to learn that what you do and what you say have consequences far beyond what you're seeing, right? When you are seeing the excavation or the reality of fact behind this person, this general person coming in, or Gentile person, whatever you want to put it, that's a safe word. You always have a safe word, right? Coming in and slaughtering, right? There isn't a magnificent frequency behind it. God's not going to save you about that one. Your hands are going to save you if you have hands, or your pencil or something like that, or your whatever it is you have on you is going to solve that issue. Liability insurance, any takers? So that's what I thought, right? So it is your personality. I mean, when your belts you wear on your body. So I mean, you go and ask a set of 5 people, and they say the same answer. Oh, no, I know all about it, but I don't do it that way. And let me tell you my story, right? So let me tell you about this story, this hypothetical or this realistic kind of identity crisis, right? You are asking yourself, you're an undocumented, unofficial mass shooting victim, and what can you do, right? So it's not as simple as a bank robbery, sort of. It's not as simple as, stealing from the lemonade stand. And I'm going to be the first one to say it. At least you can make money, but it's probably not worth the official or unofficial or documented case of this. And this is coming from someone who's kind of like an expert, but doesn't have an official license. So here we go. I have put together a few questions, but first of all, let's read the little enigma, or the sign here. It says, "What does it mean to be a documented official mass shooting victim?" And there's little decals there. Not in the records, not in the stats, not in the memories. We remember the ones left out with the teddy bear and candle and heart sign, holding the sign. Not counted. No official record. No recognition. No support. No closure. No justice. No justice, no peace. Who came up with that one, right? And let me just kind of blur it out. This is the 3rd episode. I hope for only 6 episodes, and I hope it doesn't go out for too long, because I don't get paid for them. I'm sure I might not get 0 or no view counts, but I mean, it matters that this is documented somehow very appropriately and very efficiently, right? So they exist, they matter. And there's that one, and then there's the person with a question mark over their head, kind of like looking out in the city in a crime scene. So, what does it mean to be in a mass shooting that has been undocumented, or what does it mean to be an undocumented mass shooting victim, or an unofficial one, right? So you look from the small belt to the big belt. Stepping up, I mean, you are in the mindset of like, everything you hear, everything you see is like rock and roll in your mind. When you're a mass shooting victim, it is far from it, really. I mean, you are finding a reality behind escalation. What feels appropriate feels the same means to like, do something you need to do. If it's doing a lap every day, it's doing a lap. I mean, yeah, that's catching up to the sobriety or the mindset of maybe a police cadet going through training, right? So what about other things like the money or something like that? Yeah, we as Americans have programs in the United States to suffice certain things, which is a collateral for victims. Not every state is the same, but some states are different, and they might have money, or it might be that you are remitted towards something like Social Security. And I'll be the first one to say, yeah, if you're a gunshot victim, you could be on Social Security for anxiety disorder, right? And that's how you'll be collecting money. Or something like, if it's a characteristic of hemorrhaging of your blood, or obviously the wound itself, those could be the realities, schizophrenia and something else. But one thing you do know is they cut you off from one medication and you end up in the system, right? Because once you're on that list, you don't get off. So you ask yourself, I'm in the midst of being an unofficial victim, or I'm an actual official victim of a mass shooting. Thank you very much. Or I've been in this situation far enough to understand what the reality is, or I've had enough of missing people from a mass shooting to know what it means to see casualties, right? So there's some similarities in the web. Right, there's a lot of unknowns as well, which are the realities that are charting around it. I mean, what if someone witnessed, what I saw? What if somebody saw what I saw that day? Or what if, I was able to change the game and that person would still be alive? And I mean, without the contempt in your heart, you have to say, yeah, I want everyone to be alive. I want, not God to be. I mean, the point is you're in a real statement. You are really in a conversation there with yourself and saying, I want better for people, right? I want, not just what I can't have. I want to find something that's real, not opposing me, not against what I believe in. And your belief system says a lot about you. You are a victim, but you are not, it's a hard, tough thing to break. I mean, you can't talk about it, A. B, you have no one to share a story about in which could believe it, right? So the situation is farther out than you believe, right? You can't just bring it in with something that doesn't exist, right? For example, let's say you're in the military, you experience a mass shooting and it's unofficial. Never happens. The reality there is you're stuck with these thoughts for a very, 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 very long time, and you will not find an answer. Let's say you were a victim at a young age, and you're given up for adoption from another country, or even in the same country. You are left alone, and you have maybe a wound or something that's going to go really bad in the future, and that's going to be real for the rest of your life, right? Not every inadequate moment in your life, action, the things that you experience will not get back to you. They will always be an effective, region in your support system for the rest of your life, right? The fine-tuned metal of that bullet, the fine-tuned print of that bullet is going to stick with your mind for the rest of your life. The rest of your life, I mean, if you're the one, let's say you're in the military, if you're a police officer, you pulling that trigger is going to stay in that person's life for the rest of their life, right? They're going to know exactly what model or make that weapon is. They're going to know why you were pressured for that situation, why you should have had different options to do that, and why you might have better options in your real world thinking, so that they can calm you down, more in a supportive means, right? Because once you break out of that fictitious, victimization, right? So the settled argument is high, and then the other side gets higher, right? Because it's supposed to, right? You're not supposed to build on the agony of victimization. You're not supposed to build on the victimization of death, right? So it's appropriate for many levels and reasons. So if you're going to oppose the argument and you kind of just settle down for a second, say, yeah, I want to oppose the argument, and I say, the victim in the situation is the victim himself. I'm a police officer, I'm protecting him, or I'm protecting myself or my partner, right? And then the opposing party, and let's say, you suppose, they had the bad hierarchy of doing drugs, or that they don't have their limits, right? So they don't go and show you, what they need to show you, right? But you think about the other way, right? So suppose that's one example, and things get out of hand, and there's some sort of frustration from the outlookers, right? And that's what kind of really matters, because it's guiding you, right? But the other side of it says, well, hey, that guy got aggressive, but he was trying to max out. He was trying to tell you, hey, you got to stop doing everything you're doing because you did something wrong, right? But again, the other argument, and you settle down to kind of hear the whole story. That's the whole point of why you wanted this job in the first place, right? Sometimes it doesn't happen, sometimes it does happen, but nowadays in the modern world, or the modern frustration, right, you find that things are more tedious than ever. There's not a lot of time for things, but from one to the other, a social worker might say you have all the time in the world, and scratch everything that said you don't have the time, because that's what's going to matter the most. Or the police officer says, I have the time, I have to do so much, I have to make a mile or whatever, I have to go diet, or I have to do something else. I mean, yeah and no, it has to do with a few principles, right? But like education, or certain things matter in this principle, such as a social worker doesn't have to run a mile every day, such as a police officer has to carry a large amount of gear on them, right? It doesn't mean it's a double negative. It's like a checklist. Mark it off, and kind of saying, yeah, you're going to listen to every single conversation, every single moment, or you're going to do it again, right? So the principle there is kind of saying, hey, we're looking at the angle of something, that is not in that horizon when you're looking at, this, right? The undocumented or unofficial part, right? But the reality of an official part, which is having that body camera on you, or having the camera on you as a civilian, or even having a phone camera. Gosh, they give us phone cameras nowadays. So the reality there is a big deal, rather than the escalation itself. You're putting, two types of sour together. I mean, you're putting two types of sweet together. There isn't a really ready purpose for what you're trying to explain, right? Things take off, but your skill, your job set is you're hired to look at, the analyze everything, every little detail you're looking at. You're not supposed to be messing around with the idea of checking and questioning. You're supposed to follow the rules, right? Top rule says if you enter the country, you show documentation, right? Or if you go on the streets, you show documentation, because it's not a charter, right? It's about the facilitation of your identity. It's about your situational, you might consider a block schedule. You may consider it the readiness of the law, but the law says the readiness is about the documentation, or not the escalation, but it's about the realization right there. So that one is also one that's out. I mean, that's been around since like something like World War II, or since they cut off blocks in certain countries, right? So the reality there is to show not that you are delinquent. You're showing you have some sort of serenity or peace, right? You kept an identity. You have ability to provide paperwork on hand if you're going to do certain things, which is travel is one of those things, or find work is one of those things. Secure your identity is one of those things. And it might be considered for security reasons, and it might be considered a type of program, like a lot of programs. But the reality there, we keep these laws still an essential identity, right? So they're kind of placed there because they're more efficient. They're less recluse, meaning they're not applicable to apply random rules to. You're finding a way to not keep novice, but to assure the people in the community that you are accountable somehow, as like a commitment, or committee would take a judgment in a larger way without having bylaws, right? In a way, but the practicality is also or a community organization basis. But beyond that, it's about kind of, it goes into like this ritual kind of identity kind of situation, where you're looking at a blueprint or a reality behind what your sole destination, what your plot is, what your ability is to look at, maybe in the homeland, like in Homeland Security, and do. But the reality is also about sometimes there's centralized belief, but I mean, it will go on into a whole thing. You'd probably have to read something about it. But so, what the video was about was, or is about, is the unofficial or undocumented needs of, or the reality behind someone who is undocumented or unofficial mass shooting survivor, right? So we went on to the ethics as a principle of maybe workforce or vocational need, but the reality behind different things like communication, reality behind grounding, and there's not a lot of realities behind many of these things, right? Same as for somebody who is depicted as abused, right, and follows the rules until they snap, right? So that is very, very real. Right. So when you share that communication channel and you get cut off somehow, sometimes it can be a daunting fact. Sometimes it can be a fight for your life. Sometimes it can be a necessary step for about anyone. And I mean, like, you're stepping in the blue line when you say that, right? So I don't mean it like, there's a prejudice or, some individual wins versus the other, but the blue channel is something you hop on, right? It is the idea that, when you're significantly, finding this frequency or finding this, improvement in your life, it's not going to be about, attacking your opponent. It's not going to be about, finding, the faith in your opponent somewhat, right? But to some principles and some beliefs, you use that. Some beliefs also have a grounding mechanism, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I think most people absolve themselves into that principle grounding technique, right? It's a difficult principle to understand. I don't think our system and our color etiquette, I mean, like, actual colors we use those technologies anymore. But there are certain systems in the world that do use those things, and they use those dyes and certain things like metals and things like that, if you're unaware. But the reality behind that communication ethic, at least in the United States that I can see, is a principle that drives us for a long time, and that might be considered slavery, right? So that slavery or the embargo there goes back for many, many years, not just PWs, but further south to the slavery itself, or the conquest. And there's not a lot of studies for it, and it also goes into the serfdom, principle or reality, and there's not a lot of studies on that one either. So that's a real whole focus. You would have to contempt your life, style two, your life. So when you look in these, slavery institutionalisms, you find that that channel blue, or that reality of the darkest dark, is kind of like the Magna Carta being signed, right? There was enough of the slavery channel, and it became a fashion, right? Before that, it was maybe meant for royalty, meant for a certain reality, and it doesn't mean white or black. There was both slave owners who were white and black, or brown in some circles. The Irish have the Brow surname, and a lot of people do not know that is meaning they were freckle face or brown, right? So the reality behind certain things, share an identity. The makeover of Magna Carta is one of those things, is a breakthrough through to slavery, or for freedom, I suppose, and liberty. But the reality there is also, it is the cottonweed that mattered, and it was the cotton that was being picked by slaves, and it became a stylistic mindset of, massively rich versus poor, rich and poor, rich, stylized. And there's not a lot of history again about that, and you would have to go talk to a specialist. But the reality there, it is in the makeup and the fine print of these ideas. So, as you can show, you could input or impress, the market, or create a stylization. But it is a new modern concept. It's some principles, maybe after the Renaissance, right? There's a change and makeover from different things and principles of what you can and cannot have. So that was a little bit about the history of just some dumb and solid thought of communication channel. Right. But when you look at grounding, you're looking at the imperative of a new makeover. And again, with new makeovers, there's not a lot of history. There's not a lot of ethical points on a plot. You can't say, 1 and 1 is 1 today, or, I thought the color orange today and everything turned out fine. Maybe a Halloween, but maybe not on an everyday basis, right? Maybe if I have a sense of humor, and maybe if I didn't grow up Nazi. So all those things are cogent. They'll say, that person points to the westward direction. They're not in contempt of court. obviously, and they're not in contempt of a reality that is going to harm someone, right? They might be humorous, they might be abstract, it might be showing a personality that is not obstructive, but relates to a whole story, a whole congruent need or nature, and it fits the adjunct reality. I'm not going to use the word right now because it is a part of modern psychology that's paid for, right? It's the paid for cognate or cogent reality, right? What misses land but sea, or is it what misses sea but land, right? So the reality has a charter and it has a principle, which is another clue to the bigger puzzle of why this is happening. And there's no way to put it, why this is happening, but possibly corruption or the ritual gone wrong, or in other words, a frenzy idea that is just plain bad. But where does that leave the rest of us? That leaves the rest of us with nothing and nowhere. So when you're in this situation of being in a mass shooting, being undocumented, being unofficial, you were off on a tangent no matter what. You're within the reality of no support whatsoever that can give you hope. In a way, right? You have the possible means to keep ethical, keep a list, keep the shroud notion that anyone could die at any moment, possibly because they're unprotected, right? You're unprotected. Your environment is unprotected. Your quellness, however, is soured or undeveloped by the nature of security. In a way, the rule of thumb says security is as novice, kind of like identification would be, as parallel or as dependent on the needs of the community. So there's nothing really wrong with that. But the domicile or the reality of what if the frenzy caught on? What if someone found out there was no one claimed to be in the official mass shooting and the official mass shooting didn't happen? Or how do I put it? The unofficial person from the mass shooting or the undocumented person from the mass shooting spoke up and it caused a frenzy in the town, right? So there isn't an emotion that makes very much sense. This is America today. This is how America works, and this is how America, scaffolds, their opponents, right? The system is built to have this integrity. It's built to have, the emotions set in place. Take, for example, the Perkins Loan Program that was up for 20 something. It was up for a while. I'm not sure exact dates, but the emotion for a student of having extra cash is just the moment or the stylization to get to the summer, to get through, to have the job, to have a little bit of the clothes, to have the cotton cut, or have the emotion to have the ability to feel better, like to have the money to do drugs, but not to not get away with problems a student would have, right? So I mean, the question is, student muggings, all these ideas go about all the time. Does that make you a student though to have the issue, right? Same as a researcher isn't taking claim for the research that they've experienced, right? So there's the question. Even if you're a counselor, even if you're an advocate, it's the same principle right there. Your academic support is the support that you need the most. Say you take this video and you start quoting it for one of your documents for school and says, this is part of a story series now. Will they take it? They might just take it and say, this is America today, and this is how it works, even with the shooty name or the crazy name or the unfancy name, right? So the principle stays the same. So when you're on these tedious, ends, and security, develops a sense, and you find yourself in the midst of security, finding the angle of what you're believing in, which is, should I be confused? I met somebody in this situation who just said they were a mass shooter, or they were in a mass shooting, and they're undocumented and they are unofficial. Yes or no? The question is, do you believe yes or no for that question, or do you believe there should be an IOU, or it should be both, right? In accounting, you believe in all those, right? You believe in false and true, and you believe in the IOU, right? But why the security guard? Like, is that stealing private information? Is that stealing information that should be secure, or something that relates to a security clearance? And that all those questions say yes or no, and does it possibly meet the criteria for Again, the IOU. Do you take it into the ritual, the community, the commitment, the policy? And they say that's quite not enough to defend that argument. And I would say you're right. But again, somebody says maybe you're wrong, right? The existential need, and we've gone over this for the other two episodes, are somewhat more humorous or less humorous, if you will, but they are existential needs because they meet the criteria of the rationalization of thought, of rationalization of ethic. And I mean, they're very basic structured thoughts that I would say a lot of students, in their younger years believe in, but are just put down by teachers, academics, by professors, by professionals. They say, no. And as someone who's gone through, let's say, a mass shooting that's undocumented or unrealized or unofficial, you would say, yeah, the attention doesn't belong. You shouldn't be preaching. You shouldn't be studying anymore. You shouldn't be a professional adult. You shouldn't be a nurse. You shouldn't be a doctor. You shouldn't be a therapist. So, if you raise your hand and vote and said, yeah, if you lied about a mass shooting and that person was an unofficial mass shooting victim and they have, complainants saying left and right saying, yeah, there was a mass shooting there, but you didn't do anything about it, even though it was reported many times, it really wouldn't do much. So it would be inconsiderate, it would be rude, it would be unethical, it would be like a coup d'etat, but with people in control, right? It would be about the people in control. But then you say, we live in America, we live in American society. No one's segregated, no one is dissident like that or dissident. Everyone has applied their oath to American region or chain, and that's corruption right there. Or in fact, they believe in things that there has to be some spotting measure. If they're not evil, they have to believe in at least some sort of hierarchy of belief that sets them different, I suppose. And then that mass shooting victim or the unofficial one is, it could have been an informant or it could have been an undercover police officer or it could have been something else. But again, you don't know those things, and your essential identity wouldn't matter in that stake relationship, even if for a civilian. They can do whatever they want. If they were involved with that, I believe they should be able to live a happy life, and they should be able to do certain things that are unalienable, especially for secure needs or the protection of others, right? So, there's no statement in the Constitution that says no to that. Money and time, yeah. Money and time go together like stacking stones, but they don't always have to go together like that. But that brings the principle of the mass shooting. If there was ticking time, or the idea of money and compassion and time going together, would the mass shooting have happened and not happened? So you could raise your hand and say, without war, there is no time. Or with war, there is time, right? So the cogent relationship is a basis for the system in which you approve or improve. It's a system in which you create. So the way you believe in war is the same way you create a mistake, right? You use something that has the same potential for the same thing that uses the same potential, right? The potential there is the easiest method because it is the same way to communicate. It's the same way to share a principle. We all have forks in life, we all have spoons in life, and we all have mistakes in life, right? So the principle there is a relationship that you share, right? It's communicative and need, and the balance is grounding. In a way, you would have to believe it in some ways. Every human is born relentless. They're a creature for passion. They're supposed to make peace. That is, as humans, what we believe in as humanists, right? And that is, the protective clause in which we have our foundation in the Constitution, maybe, or beliefs and rights and voting thoughts, right? Or vote power, right? So the reality of other things that are less or more, such as the mass shooting that didn't take place, obviously, or the quality of ethic, or the support for a communication chain that is more ethical, right? It doesn't just exist because somebody said it doesn't exist, because it can be used in a certain way, because if it was kept on being used in a certain way, it has changed somehow, right? If there was never two wars that were fought, there was never two wars that were even, right? Right. So that is the American spirit today, but we don't have a fighting ground. We have a fighting force, right? We have a civil war that doesn't really take place in a lot of other places where they have reliquos, right? They have wars and many wars and wars that were unsettled thoughts and times and dynamics and settlements. We have wars against people. people and individuals, which suffice to say is in our constitutional right to protect individuals as a way to protect racism. These individuals belong to the class and racism, not because they are a class beyond themselves, right? So the principle there says, time, money, a relationship itself, a decade ago, right? So yesterday's episode, or the episode about should people drive cars, about mass shootings, proved that everything is dumb incel or dumbic incel, right? It's set aside, it's petty, and is drifted as a variable through a mortality or a portion of their time or a portion of their unit, right? And that's a very important thing. The unit is a very important thing. It's not about, yes or no or right or, I've gotten this right for the most time. It's about being there. It's about the principle of language support framework in a way, and about the time itself being a clue for certain things, right? Like language is a clue, and it doesn't say time is disqualified because it's not part of my time work or my framework. It's about the principle in which you can support a reason, right? It's a principle in which you can support conclusions, right? Support your needs and wants, like Maslow's theory, or principle, matters, like the things you believe in. So if you watch this video and started believing in mass shootings that happened to indivisible people, or people who were or were in these situations but had problems, but you start to believe in them. Over time, I believe you'd start to believe in them, and you start to find a reality behind, what is right or what is human, right? It's not just one person that makes a principal choice or the principal decision. It's not a bunch of people that says, oh, we're going to do away with napkins today. We're going to do away with paper, right? No one's going to say that. You're going to start a war, right? You're going to start a war saying, there's no more stones in the world, and we get rid of all the stones. We're going to get rid of all the products that can cut things like scissors. We're not going to do that anymore. But the principle there also says, you have a reason. It's not rock, paper, scissors. It's about society as a whole. It's about civilization doing better and evolving over time as an evolutional period, right? Not like the last video that says, the irony is this staken thing, and people should be able to drive, but there should be the question, right? Of course, you should be able to drive because it's a evolutionary need to find technology, sort of, right? Many philosophers, many principles will disagree at the end of times and saying, there is no philosophical point that says evolution is a need for technology. Some will, and some will argue it's a naturalist dependence on something like sociology, criminology, or the principle or driving point of not serenity, but power and struggle between communication, right? So the principle there, or the version, or the domain there, is a selective region of your mind that says, we believe in democracy, we believe in power, we believe in control. We don't believe in that, what you said, but we believe in humans, right? Not exactly. Not exactly. Humans aren't the only one that are conclusive there, right? So if an animal was in the situation and said, or they shouted really loud like a bark and they said, no, I was a victim of a mass shooting and I'm undocumented, or I'm a victim of a mass shooting and I'm undocumented, right? So the principle there is setting, right? You're finding a setting, stone, or setting, belief system that is more pure, that is more honest. For a human to say, they're crazy, they're in doubt, they're in pain, they're not fitting in, they're not conclusive. They show no rights. They show that there's no answer beyond the problem that is in the now, right? The principle from now is based on abuse, based on unoriginal or unsupportive arguments that mean nothing again, right? So it's like a computer counting binary in the number 5. Instead of number 4, number 6, you're counting in number 5. So shorting your number every single time because communication isn't coming across, right? The principle there is not about finding the ropes. It's about doing what's right. If your dog was feeling sick one day and you didn't feed it for a week, of course it's going to feel bad. Same as like a dog, getting a microchip and saying F that. I don't need the microchip anymore. I'm gonna go fly off. Or so like, isn't this poison? Your dog kind of looks at you and kind of like, why did you send me to a doctor that put that in me? Or, let's say the dog that was actually shot, healed from the wounds, became adopted, and then basically, what is it called? Found a microchip. The doctor didn't believe them, and then basically they're having panting attacks. They keep on going up to people and saying, "I want to be in the video, prove I'm alive," or "I can't believe what had happened. My last owner had died in a mass shooting that was and then was shot." So, how would that feel? It wouldn't feel very good, and I think the dog might agree they can't drive unless this is a very smart dog. And I'm sure there might be some smart dogs, or maybe this dog is kind of one of those crazy dogs on YouTube that paints, that does everything by numbers, can type the tap button and says, "Yeah, that's me." But who knows? Who knows if that's right or wrong, or if that's real, right? So the potential there is charting ideas, and you go into the idea of like something like hearing voices, the philosophy or ethics of hearing voices. I guess the solution there is there is no solution, right? It's a ever-ending question about the ethics of peace, right? You give it a moment, sort of. It's about the schizocell. And if you don't know what the schizocell is, it's like a debrided cell that kind of duplicates and replicates their own cell pageant, kind of like cancer would be, but not that stage, because it's its own thing, right? It's its own principle. If everything kept on repeating over time, it's technically considered the schizocell, like in biology, right? And that's kind of like the main frame of being a researcher. You're going to prove that. So we go on to the next, residual or idea of this question, which is completely unorganized at this moment, and we're going off on tangents. So the principle there is, how would you become documented if you're a mass shooting survivor and you're undocumented, unofficial? You can write a letter, you can go to the DA, you can talk to Attorney General. I think it all really points in the end to the Attorney General, as they are the OIG for about every DOJ program, and that's in the United States. So the principle there, you meet with the one, the transition to the next one, the transition to the next one. But the principle there is, I feel you. I give you your heart, because you can't prove it. You can't prove it, but that's what they make consider the paranoia. That's what the unethical doctor would say, and says, why don't I just diagnose you with that instead of saying, the old sameness, right? You've been in that. So, kind of questionable, kind of saying, just because it started, good at one time, and it was bad at the other times, or it just started bad after a few bad years, and said, I'm going to start hurting you as a doctor, and said, you made it up. Would that sound pretty good? I mean, not really. I mean, I don't think a cowboy would like that. I don't think a superhero would like that. I don't think a president would like that. I sure don't think anybody would like that. I don't think a dog would. I don't think a lot of people would like that or enjoy that or would like to hear about that. Right? That sounds awful, right? Even if there was a silence, I mean, it just isn't. It isn't a real thing of talking about this, or enjoying company, or sharing more of your information. Of course, they have to forget and make them forget. But the reality, or idea behind that is, is it humor? Is it ethic? Is it conduit? And I mean, conduct. That's pretty simple, as it belongs to a child, right? Conduct. It's unbecoming for a human adult, right? Conduct disorder, child, right? Like the word informant, you might find in a lot of books, is just related to children, right? Informants are children, right? So the principle is clouded. It's unjust. It is unreasonable. It's off to an unsteady start, feeling like somebody's running some sort of operation that is unusual, in contempt of the law, is unsupportive, and kind of terroristic in a way, right? I mean, without me saying it, without reading it in a actual book that would be there, I don't know of any books, but you'd read and say, if that operation there was going to go collect all that money, $500,000 each, and say, You worked in the drug field, even. I mean, you work in multiple fields. If that happened, it would be crazy, right? You would be some sort of genius to figure it out. But then you would also be a genius to be there, right? So the commitment there is not fractional; it's shares a relationship, right? So the odds are the evens there, and the evens are the odds, but they are distributed. So there's another point in the calculation flaw there is that you can distribute whole ideas, right? You're distributing whole ideas because they're kind of like packets of information, packets of fortune, packets of reality. You would say the word concept out loud, that's a cuss word. You could say that's a fine way to make something opposite, and it still wouldn't come through. Not even 6 months. Right. So the principle there is, individuality. Again, you don't have anything that's going to make you better. It's not going to define you in this situation. But the frequency, again, the frequency of a human, the unsettling data. And then we go back to the data, whole numbers, more people, right? Unsettled data, realized, right? Negative data, real, categorized, right? But the principle or the productive feature of a whole number would have to be an exacting number, meaning it shares a principle. And that principle could be set on in Dumb Cell, 0, but that might be set on yours in OFT, right? So it's like an executive function in calculus, right? The principle is it takes ownership. It is an owner of the mathematic, reality operation that's creating the problem. So you turn around for a little quick second and say, I think kind of killer here. If they don't allow an undocumented, and I spelled that right, undocumented or unofficial mass murder victim to become free from their ploy of explaining mass murder victim scenarios or mass murder stories, would they be able to, and I say stories, I mean, events tick down, right? I mean, one story, one out of the building, one out of the other building, maybe. What about, going in and even thinking about one after, maybe? But the reality there is, is that the principle? Is operation that the same thing is? So if all the operations in mathematics had one operation, that was the eulogy, not the principle of safety, of zero decay, of novice protection, right? Protecting by the basic principles and setups for law so that you could stay safe, right? The principle there is the novus of operations, multiplication, division. The reality of a whole lot is operable, unlike words, unlike codes, unlike supportive means, right? So those principles, again, are generalized, and are not even inputted on or can be created on a computer. So the same principle applies to numbers, letters, and different things. Uh, so the principle there is, it's fortunate, it's supportive. It is kind of like a curve of data that is not applicable almost because it shouldn't make sense. Maybe to a social worker or to researcher or somebody looking at things, they might say, "Yeah, I'm not going to touch that for such and such reason," or that doctor is not a bad guy like that. He's a terrorist, right? He's going to prison for 50 years for what he had done, and they're trying to recharge him, and it keeps on going on saying, "I'm trying to recharge you for the crime, recharge you for the crime," and then enough is enough, and they say you ignored a massacre enough for you to die. I mean, when you go into the question of who's in the hierarchy of victimization or the reality of, let's say, a social worker or a police cop or somebody working for the government, and you've never heard this story except in James Bond before, but it's terroristic. They're committing awful tragedies on a whole spectrum to kill many. The relationship there is to kill the opponent, to kill the terrorist, to kill the person committing the coup de rayon, not the coup d'etat, but the coup de rayon. So someone in this situation is causing a foiling effect, a plot, a reality. And we go to foiling plot. This is just like the operation. You're finding a way to break free from the sensation of the operation, which is always expanding. Finding a way to deviate, matriculate, and then relate. Just like communication would be, and communication should be, the communication itself it falls apart, right? Why? Because the foil itself is not set up correctly, right? If you go from one number, one variable, it's not going to do it. You're going to use the whole foil. Right? The whole foil is going to get you to that, and that means the speconometrist. You get one little pixel on your screen of the color red. You go get a Windows document computer and you prove it. You say this is the one pixel, and I'll look at it under the code microscope of the text pad. Right. So the principle there is it's not really fun. It doesn't really make money. You're not learning anything. You don't learn anything at all, right? You almost sound like the addict on the street smoking fentanyl, right? So the principle there again is they work in herds, they work in packs, right? That guy's a mass shooter and he has the ability to mass harm. Does that mean he has the ability to hand it out, right? Give pain, give hope, give hearts, or does it mean he's making the honest mistake and he needs to get better? And there's laws about that now. There wasn't always laws about that in a way, but what if somebody disproved it again, right? It doesn't mean they can't, right? It doesn't mean you can shut it off. It says, the guy didn't know much, but sure didn't know this. So, I mean, you can think about, a lot of things, a lot of principles. You can put a sad face on, you can put a angry face on for a day, or you can put a what they consider a fragile face, or a muddy face, or a black face, right? A painstaking face, right? But it doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it wrong, right? So the same principle goes for war, it goes for ethic, it goes for ground forces, it goes for the police, it goes for, I guess, an undercover, or I guess an informant working in a business, right? The solution there, a little bit unofficial, a little bit undocumented, but however, they have a piece of paper in front of them, right? Who gets to burn who in this situation? Social worker or the revelation of a psychologist that has no proof? They have no proof because there's no reality behind it. Can see no facts now, or it's time written, right? Questionable. Are you in the midst of a situation that's always involved in mass shootings, right? Does it matter if you're hyperactive? Well, these ideas don't go together like that, do they? They don't go together because they're not realities, right? So let's go back to the examples. I mean, you were a dog that was in a mass shooting. What about a young child who was shot, lived as a mass shooter, shooting victim, but they never caught the mass shooting victim, and they had to throw out the case and said, well, there was no mass shooting. They cleaned up the blood after, and you were in a mass shooting. Same as overseas, you were shot, killed, and they planted your body somewhere. So the principle could be the same in normal America, right? You're a prostitute. You were killed over smack in which they made you do and raped you, right? So the principle is like kind of saying, like, my body got placed somewhere else, at least. I'm in fake heaven. But, the reality is also, is the starting point somewhere. Maybe journalism, maybe something else. I mean, maybe it's just late night, but the reality there is it continues to happen again and again and again and again. You could be in a undocumented situation. You could be in a unjust situation, therefore. You could be in a loving situation with a mass shooter. Could they be manipulative if they're already manipulative? Who says they're not? Who says they're not superheroes in this situation, right? Have you ever thought like a killer? Have you ever met a killer? Do you know a killer? Do you know what a killer would do if they were given the opportunity to do more things? Right? They believe in absolute freedoms to do absolutely what they want to do. Absolutely what they want to do is kill. Right? They want to kill. They want to mutilate. They want to murder. Right? So when you look at different serial killers, like let's say the BTK killer or the killer of or Samuel Little, or the killer, the Green River killer, or what's the other one? Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, there's plenty of killers. Charles Manson. I mean, there's plenty of killers. There's lists of killers. If you're in the military, it's the same, and it's kind of the same. You don't listen to any direction whatsoever. Does that make you a serial killer? What about the reality of being in a impression that you can lie about killing? Does that make you a serial killer? Or what about the impression about killing for no sport at all, for the ethic of the input of killing, right? So there's a reaction, and then there is, the point of killing, right? I guess. Is there a point of killing to things? I mean, I hope not. Or what about what is it called? Killing better than other people. I mean, if some point, some killers were out of hand and said, my killer or instinct was better than their killer instinct, or my killer belief was better than the other instinct, would that be different? What if you compared it to a mass shooting victim or a victim of gun violence? One said theirs is worse than the other. One says theirs is worse or better than the other. Mm, I don't know. I mean, if I was a mass shooting victim and I was, getting, questioned or saying yours is better than the other, I would say, I would lie. I'd probably say, no, I don't think so. I'd probably say, I'd lie, and then, I get questioned by better than the other. I mean, would that be the relationship between the killers? Would they be the ones questioning through an ordinary ethic, like in a hospital? Does that even make sense? Creating a sample, a chart in the hospital as a mass murderer to brainwash someone who is a victim of a mass shooting? What about the child who is in the mass shooting? What about the adult who is a mass shooter, right? Does it give them the ability to manipulate? At some point, will they have to create the idea, or is it intuitive, or is it a reason to create the support in nature, right? Is it forbidden? Is it hate? Is it an argument that should never happen? Is it priority for this type of murder, right? A lot of those were checked off. A lot of those were kind of ringing bells. A lot of those were saying, yeah, they seem like, mass murder, being a violent offender, or, being gun violent, victim. It's about the same thing because they are all time based. They are all on a reason to live on some sort of skill level. What about, finding a way to break free from contentiousness, openness, assertiveness, right? The principle is like, eating food, drinking water, right? You're drinking water to eat food. You're driving, or you're braking, or you're breathing to create a notice, right? You're creating a way to speak to others, right? No system is set up correctly sometimes, and I think the principle there is that you're trying to improve it somehow. Also, the principle there is also saying, there is a novus point in choice, and no choice should say you just communicate, you just find a reality behind your fortune, right? So the mass shooting undocumentation, right? It's not necessarily nothingism, right? Nothingism is finding a way to escape pain, right? I mean, that's a good way of putting it. Finding a way to escape pain and finding a reality, right? Just kind of like alcoholism, addiction, manipulation, abuse, right? But the novice art or choice of not just nothingness, but of something, of the progress, right? It might be, this being new, a unit, someone, but it's also being about, sobriety, about choice, about action, about support, about notice, about, something more than segregated information that has no domicile reason for support, right? Action choice equals consequence. Action choice equals support. So there are differences in the Novus, and it's not just the 24-hour setting. As you can see, a mass shooting victim goes through a lot more than every day. They go through a lot more than every day because they have something to live for, I suppose. Right? All lives cost money, and all lives cost more money than to survive, right? So when you think about the choice you have to create an action, it could be a syllabus of these stubborn thoughts somewhere in the world. Somebody's writing it down wrong, and they just don't know what they're doing. right? There has to be some sort of humanity power out there. There has to be some sort of relatability, peace, nurturing, right? Nature. There has to be the ability to escape when you need to, liberty if you have it, freedom if you need it, right? So the principle there is still about money. In a computer modern age, we believe in money. Of course, operations should count, but money is the only thing computable for a human. That's the society we live in. Even with this Bitcoin, even with the cryptocurrency, even with the reality of counting by digits, the def count by digits instead of money, yeah. Does that make it right? I mean, I think they've proven now that they can't speak for themselves because it is a contact of relief, right? The contact and inhibition, that stylization of pickle thought of finding not one or two or three because you said it, it's because you find a way to create something new, not outdated, something new, right? So just because something has a name, even a number, because it has a name doesn't mean anything. The name can change at any time, right? The principle is cogent. Relationship with words and paraphrases, paragraphs, ineption, right? The belief system or meaning does not have to do with the word itself. It's a connection or connection, right? It's a different word altogether. That's the purity. That's the way we can clean words and make understandings of these revelations because they're supportive of what your needs and wants are, and they give you arbitrary reasons to live, right? Not time itself. Time is important, but as a communication skill as humans, we work as a social and empathetic way, right? If you can vote, you can vote. If you can believe in your system, you can believe in your system. It doesn't have to be a life, right? You can believe in social welfare. You can believe in human ethic. You can believe in cultural revelation, right? And that is very important to people, right? That sort of nature is showing, you are not better than other people in certain ways, but you can give them your advice. You can break off into a commitment or committee if you vote and you have a question, right? The same thing you have to ask yourself. If you're an unofficial victim of mass shooting, who would you ask? Who would you break into this group for? Or would you have to ask every single thing you look at, right? That's the computer you touch. Why that person looks at everything they look at. Why do they believe in so much electricity, so much noise in the world if they don't understand what the problem is? Problems are usually basic and they are very simple sometimes. They break down to the most simple and lowest crimes, kind of like the icing on the cake would be. Except the escalation is kind of not just the fruit of crimes, but the fruit of crimes is a way to break apart from this reality. It's to make amends. Right? This mending opportunity, it might mean different things for different people. There's different cultures for different things. So take the dollar, for example. And some places, they don't just have dollar, they have this idea that there is something more, right? Take, for example, the email. People use email every day, but they don't know the language. Use it. The ampersand. And another language, this is called the monkey tail, right? This is a currency in another country, right? A foreign one. You don't know what they do with it, but it is a frequency, a figurative, language, I guess. But the principle there is you use dotty ideas or maybe immature or unsupportive in some regions, right? In some regions, it is constipated, right? Or it's constituent. Like it's a meaning behind, human recreation, kind of like a British, concept, kind of like what Shakespeare or Holmes would say in his fighting crime, right? So a lot of questions there, and a lot of non-answers, right? It's like straight out of the question of Sherlock Holmes saying, I'm a violent, or no, I've been violated. I'm an undocumented, unattested, unmoralized, or what's the other one? Not undocumented, unofficial mass shooting victim, and I don't know what to do. Straight away you say, I could see this episode in the future of the Sherlock Holmes. I could see this episode in the reality of life itself of Sherlock Holmes. But without the principal actor, in this case, the victim themselves, and in the actual world, would there be a character on the TV show? Would it be right to manipulate the reality of this information? Ask yourself, if you're a writer, should you be an actor because you're a writer? Right? If you were an actor, should you be a writer? Because you don't have the money, because you don't have the reality to maybe sing a song, right? If you're an artist and a musician, guess how much money you make? I mean, you make far more than a writer would. A writer would make maybe 10 to 20, 30, maybe 50,000 the first years of a song, a hit song per year, and that's millions of views right there, right? Maybe 50,000 a year. That's not very much. That's less than a teacher makes. After that, it gets steadily down to 30,000, maybe. But overall, I mean, you get $10,000 a year for these royalties as a songwriter, but it might go down to $5,000, $4,000, $3,000 for that song. So you got to think, there are better ways to do it besides orchestrate that, or the reality of creating an array, a function for the time of spirits of life. It's not about the timeliness. It's about the serenity, the understanding. And I mean, I think people would understand that if they have to work every day, right? So if you went to work and you worked 50 hours flat, would it be the best time at work? And you don't have to answer. You just say, it's not the most novice, but I'm tired. I don't want any of this. I want just a house to live in, and I want to be safe, right? But the problem there is it's difficult, right? So you are the non-official, your response there. You are the non-official or undocumented responder, right? If you had no more hours to live in, you had no more hours to live for. That's a basic principle in another country. This math is real. It's realistic, right? Where we live here, we might say this is clocked hours are based on the potential of running this business. If I ever went flat, I would go flat as a hell. But the other side of the worker, maybe the organic industry or maybe the entrepreneurship, no, they're not paying taxes, right? Even if you were hired incorrectly, they say you're a contractor and they're not paying your bill for Social Security or for disability, unless they're really wealthy and you've put in those hours and you've helped. They're mostly going to commit you to fraud. And that's the honest truth. You get an F for the question of deterrence, and then for actualization. And it's a tricky word because one starts with A and the other one starts with C, right? Same as for cybersecurity, right? You always get a C, you always get an A, but you never get things perfect and you never get an F, right? So the principle there is finding not a snooping way to do something. Scratch everything you learned before. The reality of being a mass shooting survivor that's undocumented has already tried that. They already lived through the day, right? So the etiquette of the proof says, not 24/7 is the version of history you want to live. No history at all is a history that you should live that will cause problems, that will cause pain, that will cause some sort of, for sure, backfire, right? The principle of the problem of 24/7 or 24 fitting into 24 hours a day, that's a proof right there. That might be the foundation of a proof, but the resilience, not the top up, not the question of, what it means to be capped. They might throw it out in court and say CAPPED. And if you watch my other episode on my YouTube short, you'd find, there is an episode about that, what it means to be capped. They're a little bit humorous. They're a little bit, unsupportive sometimes, but they're reasonable and they're ethical, and they show you exactly what you're doing to take a place and part in society today. But the reality of being a mass shooting survivor who is undocumented, who is unsound, cogent reason, meaning they have no reality behind what they're saying and they're insane, completely psychotic and completely frustrated, or completely making up what in the backward talk of the victim would say BS, right? The belief system in which you believe in being a victim means a lot of things. It means you're holding your accountability of progression, of nicety, of being beyond fear, of being supportive to others, being less fragile, being less violent, being capable of stopping a problem if it comes to you. And I hate to be the one to say it, but that's the truth right there. So a lot of the people, who might find themselves the weakest moment, the most peaceful people, sometimes turn into the most daunting people to save the most amount of lives and have the most honest truth. Because it's a figurative justice, right? When you add up all of you done in the end of times, you might sign it over and say, I did it. It was the most important thing. You won't take claim for like what you're doing. You won't say, hi, I'm a victim of a mass shooting, undocumented. I didn't, take credit, but I did it better this time. That's not normal. It's not normal because you didn't share the language, you didn't share the principle. So I mean, it goes off into a tangent, and there's not really an answer. Maybe tonight, there's no answer to what it means to be an undocumented, unofficial mass shooting. Will there be a part 2 to it? Will there be a part 3? Would it matter if you got an answer? So if you ask yourself, if you're a mass shooting victim and you wanted to give an answer, not give an answer to someone who was going to cause frustration, cause non-operable answers to function and run, would you just ignore it, relate it towards it, or come up with another personal statement, right? The odds are against you saying you're going to do them all, because something is going to go wrong. In the layman saying, you've already done it wrong and you're not being honest, and that's not the truth, and that's not just, and that's not supportive reason to say, that's why that happened. That's why that didn't happen. It's very cliche in a way. It's like saying, I wouldn't wear clothes. I wouldn't, dream of jumping from an airplane, right? I wouldn't dream of swimming in a sea full of water and going off in the distance for life, right? I don't believe in therapy. I don't believe in seeing doctors, right? I don't believe this person can change, even though they didn't believe in mass shootings to begin with, but possibly did, but possibly didn't. So there's a frustration there because, you know what's wrong, but you know what's right, right? So I mean, if somebody gave you bad medicine, bad potatoes for a real long time and said, these are the best potatoes we got. They're just starving. You have no food, like in a potato famine or a famine. Would you eat them? If you know better, you get sick, you get diarrhea, you get red hot flushing, you get poisoned. I mean, you get, like, let's say, maggots in you or like a bacteria in you. Would you do it? Like do your 5-year-old face and scrunch it up with a 10-year-old face and go, no, I don't want to do it. It's bad for me. I don't want worms in my poop. I don't want to eat poop. That's poison. So is that the same principle of asking all that if all those were materials, all those were related to biology, and biology as a normative material science, as like it was chemistry, like organic chemistry? Is poop poison? Maybe, right? Does there mean a number between poop and something else? The same for mass shooting. Is that blood poison? What if you bought a victim's shirt from a mass shooting that you weren't involved with and you were a mass shooting victim? Would it be different then? Would it flag the system twice, 3 times, 4 times? What if there was a video about it? But what if the potential said, much, much, much more than that? What if you're the undocumented one, but you're the stopper of the mass shooting? What if you're the partial stopper of the mass shooting? Would it be different? You're speaking words that are different languages, that a framework said aren't combining for something that says they're already combining, right? I'd say so, yeah. So, I mean, if all the businesses and corporations say, we can't run this without, more money and more profit and more realization, you'd say, yeah. That doesn't really make sense to me, right? I'm tired. I'm dead tired. I can't count, the amount of reasons I want to do it, but you seem like you're going to harm me, or I'm going to do this now, or I'm going to have a freak out and rush to, save the next shooter or shooting victim, right? I would say so. It's kind of like the police work, right? Don't take me up for my framework, but say, not everything has to go through you, right? Or everything doesn't have to go through you, but that doesn't still make too much sense here. So the corporate overhead, says, they can do whatever they want. Maybe. I mean, they've been there, they've been through this, and they said, we have to charge this much money, or else we're not going to meet our demand, and we're not going to make enough money for everything else. But they'll say, like, the customer will say, not even giving us good food. You're not even making food, right? You're not even running the business for us to go to, right? Your business is basically made of blood, right? I mean, do you hang up the phone there and say, hey, we don't need to talk no more. We don't need to hang out anymore if you believe in this stuff. I mean, you're corporate. I'm just a regular person who wants to work at a grocery store that is organic, and that's it. But then what if someone comes up to me and like they go up to me and says like um, that has cyanide in it, and I work at the organic grocery store, or else you don't eat. Kind of like shit. Like you seem like a bad guy to me, or or says like the principle of like hey, that has the immediate poison that is a contagion, and that's psychological. And there you go. Or like the one says like it's good for you. It's at the grocery store. It's in Gatorade, and there you go. So the principle there, I mean, questioning the idea of taking up time and space. You think you're taking up time and space if you're undocumented in that situation? What about you're solving the solutions? Is it different than showing communication? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it a relationship behind, what is right, what is wrong? Can you drink water? Drink water for a change. What happened then? So, what if in this instance somebody says, hey, they're not trying hard enough. They work for, whatever. I do a lot better job than them. They don't need a job here. They're talking back to me. I don't really give a fuck or give a hell what they think. I supply the food. I supply the ideas. I supply everything. They work for me now. I don't tell them anything. They give me their ideas, and I don't have to do what they said, or you're going to go live on the streets. I would say the victim in that situation, if this was applying to them, would say, hey, I know a lot better, but I can't really do anything about it. Like, what? You can't really do anything about it? No, you sound like a mass shooter to me, right? So the contentment keeps on going on as like kind of a rotational revolution. No, kind of like a rev, uh, revol, revolution. No, revolving mechanism, revolving door. Some oddity kind of concept, kind of Freudian would be, but not quite there. Kind of like watching a kid show and saying, maybe, maybe not. I don't want to watch the kids tonight. We're not going to go for the revolving door. And but one thing I do know is that in principle, it's about choice, right? I mean, your choice is, like a coup d'etat, right? In the situation, I mean, if they said they're going to do that, and the belief system was there, I mean, maybe. Let's say, like, one of the orchestrators of, a terror attack, who got caught beforehand, worked at the grocery store. Would that make it wrong? Would it make it right? I mean, it's not obviously going to make it better, but it will make it, in principle, a choice that you will afford to keep your life safe. Like, if somebody who poisoned your food is going to keep on poisoning your food and threatening you, of course you should probably check it out. Or, of course you should say, I don't want cyanide in my food. Or, of course, I don't want to pretend about mass shootings. Like, kind of, how do I do that if you have no open door? And they say, oh, I have an expert here, but, he was part of the mass shooting. And then, all of my hirees were part of the mass shooting, or, they believe in the mass shooter. Right? So you're kind of like, I don't really know what to do in that situation. Or like, if they didn't believe in it or they believed in it, should they? What if they all work for the Coca-Cola company and it's very easy to work the Coca-Cola company there? Coca-Cola company there. I mean, is that abnormal? Do you know what they put in Coca-Cola? They put in cocaine. Coca-Cola. It doesn't matter if it's low grade leaves; it's still cocaine. Right? It doesn't matter if the cocaine is good and bad. unless you think it's good and bad. But the reality there is it works a lot like the problem again. But as we go, the problem is revelation of what it means to be undocumented, and then does that classify yourself as a slave, a human trafficking slave? What about human trafficking victim? I mean, you're alive, you're supported somehow, maybe you're conclusively within the system. I mean, I guess, but I mean, who can't be conclusively within the system in our country, right? But yet again, the country is a novice one, and I should believe in freedom of choice. Right? So this is what we believe in to pool up, ideas and money to do certain things. So it's a big question, right? Should a mass shooting victim be able to drive? Should they be able to have a question with God? What about questioning the identity of God? Question the moral of God? I mean, answer what to what question about God? To find a way to lay the dead. I mean, that's the way some people say. But what about should they be able to declare themselves as undocumented mass shooting victims? What about finding a way to be able to claim themselves as unauthorized? What was the word again? It was unofficial. So, should they be able to do that? Should they have a class variable for themselves? Missing, KIA, MIA, mass shooting victims. Same for kids, right? Should there be a kid version of, let's say, an unofficial kid mass shooting victim, unofficial, undocumented kid victim of a mass shooting? It might make you tired one time, it might make you tired twice, but who says what about each idea if they aren't conclusive, right? Their belief systems, right? So if you believe in one thing, you can't alter the belief for another thing, right? National foundation is one of those things. So you're pushing the identity, essential realization of effort, the support of a conclusion of ethic for the people, right? For the people. And I mean, the more the people believe in it, the more the people concentrate, the more ethical it can be. It doesn't mean nationalistic in a way. It just means maybe territory. Maybe it should be less of a territory, more of a congruent need for support, right? It doesn't necessarily close everything off. It means you do it the right way, right? Do it the most fair, most ethical way, right? It's the same as for a mass shooting victim. Do they have priority? It sounds like they should have priority, right? Automatically, you already know it's in the far off. So section, general matter, and then beyond that is critical matter or just severe. Or if it was a scale, we say um, priority, severe, and then conclusive or need. It's now, right? Or something else. But why wouldn't she be able to relate that or relay it in a shorter way, shorter frequency? And it might be contradictive, but you're looking at variables as a way to find some sort of priority, maybe example through something that is supportively lessing something, maybe creating a way to create a pool for something that is more supportive. And of course, the conclusive need or nature is an example. So, examination, yeah, I mean, you should not exactly have that in a situation. If you were keep on getting questioned as the same exact person, it would not make sense. Same as the principle of being less. But, again, these focuses are perfect, right? Should there be a perfect unofficial machine? Should there be a perfect undocumented machine? Are they the same? Should they have the same access, privilege, and belief? So, if you look at the cogent, relationship in the Bible, if you will, you'll see like, Mark, Jesus' father, takes his nails and he uses them for his work. But what about these nails are used? I mean, the sacrifice in the book of the Bible also says, Ezekiel or Matthew they use these nails to cause harm. But Mark is also the biggest enterprise or owner of nails in the area because he gives it his hope up to whatever God or whoever it is. And same as like the Muslim book, the Quran. The reality there is distant. It doesn't mean it's uh, compromised. It's distanted because it's finding a self revelation or self evolution or revelation, right? Revelation. Finding it, creating it, making it, changing it, or finding a revelation between those things, right? So just support, just questions, just work. There's so much more than that, though, right? But unofficially, there is no answer for this question. Maybe tonight, maybe there was the wrong question because it was seclusive, it was conclusive, or it was inclusive, meaning it was not shareable. It was distant because it has no solution that is more supportive in any single way or any single means because it's just a novice idea, right? If your ideas are already lethal, if they're already consequential, if they're already non-tangible, non-reasonable, non-supportive, non-conclusive, what do you have? You have a binary number. You have a real reality behind giving a situation something that it cannot have. Right? You cannot accept something you cannot accept. You say to a YouTube channel or a video channel or a camera or a piece of paper, you write something down and say, I don't have what it takes to show this belief, and you get a response, and you kind of put it in your knowledgeable way. You design it. Does that make it more real or more or less, fake? Or does it make it more real or consequential, right? So if your voice and tone were different, you don't have the exact same answer or reason, would somebody question them differently? Would that be racism? Would that be persecution that is illegal? I don't know. So here's some of the questions I wrote today about what would be the best option to do with episode number 3. It's getting about that hour now. So what does it mean to be a double 2-time gunshot victim? Does the same applicable approach be that versus being undocumented, being a mass shooting victim? In some ways, yeah. Some ways, no. But you do know that it is almost a bitter truth. It is a truth that does not cross communication idea chamber. And I'd say basically those are some methodological ways of viewing a viewpoint. You're looking at a loping fact, a loping a reason to exist, maybe more than 2 people. Right, so the potential there is being maybe a victim or a castaway. It's kind of like the meat industry in a way, right? I mean, you have few animals around you, but maybe they're sent to the slaughterhouse somewhere else. So maybe that's a good principle there. If you're a 2-time gunshot victim, maybe you're crossing some sort of abbreviated reason to live or reason to be in that evaluation. Not like the story of the Bible, but the story of working with revelation as a gift or a supportive need to create a reason. Killing isn't a good thing. Killing is a bad thing, and killing could not support you in the future, right? It's unethical like that. But it also might drive your fear away. I mean, there's a long list, but do they ethically make sense in your biology? Your biology is mostly dependent, I mean, for certain people, on meats. They might be certainly dependent on certain foods, but in reality, you don't meet a lot of people in certain cultures that eat fruit. They might say, "Oh, yes, they do. Yes, they don't. Yes, they do. Yes, they don't." But in reality, some of these things lies, right? So it's a great question, right? The feel of ammonia maybe is a cross barrier between that meat and that eating meat and just not eating meat. But the reality there is also unsupportive because it's change. We're talking community justice or sort of institutionalism, if you will. But that isn't a very normal process, right? Communication through identification, that's more normal than a unnormal process that already exists, right? So therefore it is stylization, a memento, a art form, if you will, and it's also a reality between something like human signet, something like a biological force that is a need for nature, just like schizocells or just like cell death, but cell death is a much greater thing. It's an observation, right? So let's go to the next question here. What does it mean to be a victim of a two-time lethal force stabbing? That probably is about the same, but the reality there is you're using a weapon that is outdated, right? Your outdated weapon is now for security pretensions, and then also for netic reasons, like so breaking into a car. Let's say a driver is sickly and they've broken down in the car, or they've been drugged out of their mind and they are needing resuscitation or something like that from a machine. The reality there is never it's good luck to be a victim of that, but the reality is also in this situation, if they were unofficial, maybe it would matter, maybe you become more pencil, but I think overall you lose more, right? I mean, you're losing much more as a victim of stabbing because the stabbing wounds are much worse than a gunshot wound. There's no doubt that a knife will penetrate, but that a bullet will pass right through and could kill you with vital organs. But if you're looking at the A to Z, the whole story, you're looking at, not just the victimization, right? You're looking at, far from that. You're looking at, many things a normal person would not have to experience, but, in a realization, it is about cultural realization, ethical, manifestation, but not the reality of fear, right? It's fearless in a way. Having something novice to help you save your own life is less novice, right? So there is a ego factor in there, but it just isn't really declared. It's kind of like Erickson's, 7 to 12 or like 9 to 18 or 18 to 23 or something like that. It tells you you are or have your personal statement aside, and that's like Carl Jung saying, you are within that creation between your adolescence, but you're also within that relationship between your adulthood, right? Your adulthood, goes into the approximation of your older years. It says, what are you doing now has an impact on your realization, right? So the supportive need for your conflict is a supportive need for your reason. And that might be Eastern European to some people. It might be free form, which makes it more difficult to connect with Western, typed people because it is about the estimation or resentment or their fight or fear in a way, restitution or their emotion because it's a conflict of ethics, right? Do all Western people believe in Christianity, or do all Eastern people believe in the idea of not dying, right? So the principle there is kind of enigmatic, right? So you preach one book, you get one strategy. You preach one lesson, you get all of everything, all matter, you get all advice, right? So there's no question about that. Unless you think there is, I mean, that is your resistance. That's your resistive thinking. But no one says it like that. They always say, your resistive thinking is the most formidable thinking to create a style, just kind of like time would be, right? You're counting the plotting points, the turning points, the ethics behind your dilemma, and then your reality behind that supportive need. You're using clearness or silence. I mean, in a way. To create a matter that is a traditional meaning in a sense. And they'll say, as the professional time goes forward, that sense of tradition becomes more in sync. Just like the manifestation, but the manifestation of a knife or two-time victim of that is questionable, right? You're creating a statement, an organization, an ethic, examination, and then a proximity, which are all supportive of reasons, and then supportive of something that I consider in the field as not monetary, but precaution. Right, you're finding a precaution behind something, and it is therefore escalated because it is a definition, it is defining, and it is therefore an angle. Not really a good word for it, even though we learn it as a young age. Angle is this meaning, but it means that it is. It's a tough one. That's a tough word to break. It is like kind of like a storage, like in your mind, a memory would be, but it's also. I mean, amateur is a good word, but I mean, it's not really a good word. It's depictful. I mean, it's not, still not a good word. Conclusive is not a good word either. Despicable. I guess a judge would say despicable. It's despicable to do this crime. So I mean, yeah and no, because it is a one-way world, right? I mean, not every judge is going to live forever, but one judge will say, "No, I have one nostril that's unclean, one unkept." You know, it doesn't really make sense. I don't. You don't get the perception of not getting the perception. You have to believe in something you believe in. So it's microscopic in a way, or endothermic, or the least important, or um, hmm, mirrored is a better one, but tilted, made, sinful, broken, mob rule, closed, maybe dressed, capitalized, and then I mean clouded. Judgment is clouded, right? That's another word. Obviously, that shouldn't be the word because that splits as well. So let's go to the next question. What does it mean to die twice and be brought to life, back to life? I mean, even if you were unofficial and undocumented, I mean, your revelation there is like kind of like all the chemicals and bonds and organic chemistry coming together, your brain shutting down, coming back up, and saying we're even, and saying that's enough of that information tonight. But in this episode, and but it does tell you, you learn once, you learn twice, but the striking point is maybe the third point, right? So the principle is, they say, as a human, you can have three attacks or three pivots to your head before it becomes unconscious, or you can no longer control your body. So one, two, three. I mean, that's all it would take. But in real life, I mean, it would take much more. That will fade your rhythm. Your body will move with the vibration of your body to no longer control your muscles. You'll black out basically. But the reality of something like the chest, also a contractive function. So like your satellite, it controls your body, muscle, nerves, everything in you. That's it. What does it mean to come back to life after that, though? I mean, you're counting every single thing about you. You're counting your hair, you're counting your blood, the spit in your mouth, even though you can't control it. Some people count it, some people don't. Your hearing, everything you've done that day. When you black out, you are done for, unless you wake up somehow. When you wake up, you are not dependent on what your options or ideas or needs are. You wake up, you get out of that situation, and you dishevel, or you throw, which is mean you attack your opponent, you go straight on, and then you take them out. There's no question about, if you were in a situation in which was out of control, you were to black out, roll over twice, that person can kill you instantly. Your makeup is right there, and that is the possibility of you dying. You make up, you create this organization, you make through what their weakness is, kind of like the number schema, negative numbers, positive numbers that are relational, or irritable or irrational, right? Or the choices that can be made that are not real, right? They're fractions, right? You're playing into this detective's mindset, and you're going to break through their pain, their problem. But in your mind, once you were blacked out, you were dead. right? That means that you have the power, the information to control. It's a setting in your mind. You'll wake up from it, you'll snap out of it, and you'll say, enough is enough of causing problems. And you'll find a relationship with that, right? So that relationship is dependent on the need for your safety, satisfaction, your protocol in your mind, what you've done right, what you've done wrong in a way, because these are imperatives that you believe every day. Each root, each adjective in your word salad, or your consciousness, your ego, and your memory, or all ideas that you have formed through your social matters, your social identity, your cultural empathy, and they're all possibly turning points in your actual query of your mind. It's how you react, basically. When you wake up from near death, though, and you are in a different place, your reaction is controlled. You have control over your body at most of your point in your life until these things happen, and that is when it happens completely. You ask yourself, what if I don't have the ability to afford food and clothing? That is supported by the government right now. So your question right there is reluctive, and I'm not going to shut you off right now. I'm not shutting you off at all. I'm saying the reluctive part of it is covered by medical need and usage in the United States right now and most of the world. India believes in it. China believes in it. They do not believe in breaking these absolutisms, right? Tricking people to die. They don't believe in those things. Those are evils in a way. I mean, they're against the law. Right? There are unwritten rules in the United States, but the written rules other places. Meaning, if you break these evils or break these novus agreements with constitutional other people, the boundaries in a way, not 3 or 9 feet away as like a personal boundary for business, as a boundary for attacking somebody, killing them, right? Shutting off their system. And I'm not talking about shutting off the system like poisoning, killing them. Right, that's a situation in which he might die and not come back to life. Let's say a cook has stopped a killer, and they took a bottle of alcohol and poisoned them beforehand. They come to them, they stop them from working, and they say, "Oh no, you've died from drinking alcohol." It's kind of like the Gatorade episode, right? Just because you drink Gatorade, it seems nice, doesn't mean it's good. Just like food coloring is bad, and just like the chemical we talked about before, poison, isn't an opportunity to learn and express. It's a learning and expression to look at poison. There's one way out for certain chemicals, and there's certain chemicals that are one way in, right? So if you breathe, that's the most important. If you can breathe, the structure of your breathing mechanism will keep you alive. And that is the number one most important thing. Your habit to create a service for your body to breathe is very important. And if you have trouble breathing, it's an inadequate feeling of your body talking to you. If it's sea salt that needs to filter the funnel out, if it's something else that needs to filter it out, if you need to break away from the novice idea of the reaction in the back of your mind, that 3-second rule, that 5-second rule, it is that is keeping you down and keeping you slow. Just like time base is. If you can't count time as a unit, don't count it at all. So let's go to the next question. What does it mean to be in multiple machines? I think we've kind of covered that. It's undocumented. It is a reality beyond, that. It's unofficial as well. But the possibility of being in multiple machinings, and that is just an argument about itself. It's a whole branch, a whole domain. It's a whole question. It's beyond eating, the salad at lunch, right? So, what does it mean to be in multiple machinings? You're asking yourself, how to pinpoint every single last thing, right? Let's say you're a cop. Do you think you can handle the overload that you would have and then especially believe in something that does not exist? I don't think you can. But if you believed in something, would you share, or would it be the belief system of not believing at all for the sole propriety of believing nothing? And then, if you were to write that down on a piece of paper, would it sound like you're planning a mass slaughter? Would it sound like you're planning a mass shooting? If you talked to your coworker there or applied for new work, would it sound like you're timeless, that you have no option, or that you have no reason to apply there, or that you're insane and criminally murderous? And then we don't put the word schizophrenia down for that one. We put the word antisocial. So if anyone were to say the word schizophrenia, schizoaffective, bipolar disorder, etc., it would need to say antisocial. Antisocial, not just gambling addiction. Now, we're talking about heinous thought, dreams and thoughts and ideas about disfiguring people, ideas about murder or rape. They're all under the idea of antisocial. This person doesn't just get away with murder. No, they have a mental health issue for the rest of their life. So, when somebody says, anti-social schizophrenia, no, it's schizophrenia or antisocial. You might have a predestined illness that is related to antisocial disorder, but schizophrenia has to do with the brain and the chemical process in that. I mean, might be linked to anxiety, might be listed as a comorbid condition, as anxiety has related towards. But the general principle of schizophrenia is also relative towards episodes that are manic in the relationship to hearing voices, as well as a sensitivity to dopamine or lack of sensitivity, right? So the principle there is based on chemical depression and why or chemical orchestration, has nothing to do with antisocial disorder in a way, right? They say there's some linkage there, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's proven overnight. Proven overnight. You could live and have a Wi-Fi antenna installed into your body, and you would have schizophrenia, right? If you have antisocial disorder and you grew up killing animals and doing all sorts of bad things to people, that would make you antisocial. So whoever said that to you is dumb. So take these episodes for example, as they are relationships towards antisocial ideas that are real. So let's go to the next question. What does it mean to survive a gunshot wound to the head and feel fine? I mean, from my instance, I would think it would go right in and go right out. Same for a knife wound. If it went right in, right out, it would be really shitty if it was a knife wound that cut some arteries. But in real life, if a bullet went in and went out, it depends where it is, and then how big it is. Because I mean, the neck, just like the chest, it's straight up painful to get shot in probably both those places. I mean, the chest, critical. The neck, you can live with one side, you can live without the other. But if it's straight in the neck, you're going to die. I mean, most people who get shot straight in the neck die. They have their spine cut out. It's bulleted. They have a metal plate in the back of their head for a long time. Or either way, they have lost their vocals. They have done all sorts of things. I mean, imagine if I got stabbed in my neck and I had a sore right there for the rest of my life. It would be a really shitty time because, like, let's say you're a spy, you're going, killing people, and then a Homeland Security agent goes after you, tackles the knife, or you're a regular civilian, but then the guy escapes, tries to kill you, takes the knife, and then tries to kill you, and then you go find him again, and then he goes try to kill you again. And let's say you wake up in the morning and you have a couple stab wounds in your stomach times a dozen. So, I mean, it is up to you to believe whatever story you want to believe in. But, certain things are certain things. Wounds are wounds, right? Fat is fat. People are people. Bullet wounds are bullet wounds, I guess. The bullet wounds usually scar really hard. I don't know. Okay, so what does it mean to be... Oh, the next question. What does it mean to be an undocumented mass shooting victim? That is our tonight's question. And then as we go back to the head, I mean, it might mean you have schizophrenia because you have a battle with dependence on chemical issues. There's nothing wrong with that. You're a person like anybody else. I mean, it doesn't mean you're different. It means, I think, you'd have to kind of adjust to see what you need from your body. It might be your breath. It might be kind of your emotions. They're kind of getting and tuning into that principle of what you're trying to caustically, try to comprehend, right? And if one of those things is your boundaries, if one of those things is your ideas, right? Those are the bigger important things, because those are what are controlling and guiding your mindset, right? Once you believe, or once you have gotten shot, your life changes. You start to believe in things that you've never believed in before, and lets you open that up, because once you start believing those things, they are real. But self-doubt, that's going to stick for you for the rest of life, right? So self-doubt is like one of those things that say, I didn't believe that to begin with. I got shot. It's kind of like the episode of Dexter, and you got the black guy's kind of like, well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, I shouldn't have got shot, right? So, the question, has its ethics, its novus, it has its reality, it has its reality star, but it doesn't have its namesake. It doesn't have its apparent reason to do it, right? So once you get shot there, it's critical. Once you get stabbed there, it's critical. You have a reason to? Not really. The reason is to box, right? Your reason is to be a security guard and is to take training, right? So it's supportive, it's novus. But when you go into these principles of tradition, framework, policy, too slow. Page two senators right now and prove me wrong and say, these two senators have fixed everything. These two congressmen have fixed everything in my area. They'll vote for me. We'll write this statement up right now. We doubt it. Otherwise, they'd ban time, or no, they would write it all down and they'd say enough is enough. And these are now lists of ideas of people banned. These are people who are no longer able to live on the streets or be in the doctor's office or be mass killers. They're going to the state prison. And there's nothing that's going to stop them. They will hire a military to go after them, and they will serve their time for the rest of their lives. Unless some sort of formidable interview were to be had and some sort of realistic, kind of anointment or reality behind the exchange of what had happened and what is real. Right. So it is bad to ignore a mass shooting, and I think the ethics about that would say, yeah, all those principles sound right. There wouldn't be a need to commission. The commission is already commissionary. Right. It says, no one's just going to keep agreeing. You're going to provide the evidence now, or you're going to be dismissed. Kind of like a court martial, kind of like a prison case. Instead of the alter ego of the doctor saying no to all the mass shooting victims, you kind of say, oh no, you were helping the mass shooter way too much. You're bound to prison. You write it down in a statement now or no, and then you go to the next person, like the malpractice guy, kind of saying like, why wasn't this committed to malpractice? Why wasn't this reviewed? You're right for prison, basically. So the other question about that is, kind of hunting people down, but not in a coup d'etat, but a coup d'etat, in a way to not question dignity, but to question the survivability factor, basically. It's kind of like coincidental need, a ritual, but it's a survivability factor. Okay. But, on alert. So once you do that, you are part of the system. Ritual, you were held accountable for all your actions, pre-novus. Reality is kind of like identification. If you were set aside in the bournement or the coup or whatever you would call it, but not the militia. The militia is a formed, military-based stylization based on the Constitution, obviously. Is it the same thing? Survivability, the same thing? I don't think that's been conclusively reasoned with as a constitutional reality, but it is a choice of matter between seclusion and then conclusion, or parity, right? So the parity part would be relational, but it has been vetoed and it has been turned down to the Supreme Court for certain matters. Certain matters are adjusted, right? So if you took the principle of, the whole sloping idea, or like the whole figurative language of, percentage wise of, a fraction of the reality, which is related to, like, forgetfulness, not doing something, but the relationship towards, perception of the reality of a figurative choice, kind of like a reaction would be, or a choice, kind of like breaking into a committee, right? So that's the good question. I don't think I've heard of a lot different than that. A committee towards finding killers, and I think you could at that point replace the concept or conjugate with the killer, right? If they're going after gunshot victims or mass shooting victim survivors, and apply this to kill, in a way, I mean, you're breaking into a committee no matter what, because there's so much hierarchy as terrorism, and kids could go crazy and frenzy or insane. Basically, that wouldn't make sense, right? That policy or priority wouldn't make sense, because it's almost beyond revolutionary at that point. Because if it was not revolutionary, if there was spy work, if there was a network, if there was conclusive or concurrent relationships that were already taking place in our framework, it would therefore be revolutionary without a doubt. Because I mean, if you were submerged in one environment or the other, there would be no relationship. If there was a relationship between the priority of the nation and non the nation, it would be an execution point. I mean, you would basically be taking one executive wing downward as the way to bring it into a diplomatic meaning of not the diplomatic branch or the way you would vote. Like you would go down to the Supreme Court and you would bring the vision towards, exact voting, like the president bringing down or commitment towards the president and committee. I'm not saying, one or the other, but you bring it down to Congress and you would re-vote for that same exact meaning as a measure and bring it up in the Senate or the Congress like that. But it'd be Congress because it has less veto power than the Senate. So the priority there would be, not a indie or a ready a coup. It would be that's still a coup. It wouldn't be a coup like that. Would be demise versus fact versus survivability, which are not imperative. They're based on liberty. So I mean, when you look in psychology, they will say 101, scratch off the list for liberty altogether. In a modern cookbook or modern state, reality, there is no fixture between those points, right? Just because it ended doesn't mean it is dead philosophy. It doesn't mean it's dead political science. It is always going to continue, no matter what. So let's go to the last question here. A gunshot showdown. I don't know. What is that? Do you duel me? Do I duel you? Do I accept your duel? Do I find a reality behind the 9 of diamonds? What does it matter anymore? I have no idea. I think that's a stupid question. But I think, as the time ticks, time goes, time diversion or, time and derivative tactics. What is it called? Kind of like, off-road tactics for the FBI driving class. I mean, it's kind of like, if you were to basically challenge someone to duel, it's kind of like asking, like, hey, do you want to censor information about a mass shooting? What would you say? So you say, do you want a showdown? Probably that's a little bit too slang. You'd probably say, do I challenge you to a duel, good fella? Like, what do you mean? Because, I mean, you would be pacified. I mean, you would really come up with words to say, I need to watch you. I need to divert you into the attention of the public eye so that they are safe. No other question about that would say you are in a lockdown drill now if that were to not happen. So the question is, if you were in a lockdown drill and, someone offered to duel you after that, you would say, no, but there's a lockdown drill and then kind of imperatively keeps on getting worse. If it was hierarchy of structure, would it be corruption if they were exponentially greater or had more control? It's questionable. Would you create a showdown situation? I mean, you would have to mimic them. You would have to feel their environment, find tactics a way that are peaceful, and start to record data. I think is one important thing. We're not figuratively fighting a revolution unless you were to break down the exponential. But if it was just one faction, one individual faction, would it be separate? Would it be greater? I think the point of that is, it's the same, but it's going to be greater no matter what if it's bigger. So I think that's the answer to the question. If it was bigger, you would need to have an escalation or de-escalation. I think that one has been solved. Yeah, you could say it's positive, but I don't think the reaction was going to go very good. If it's positive, I think the reaction there is bias. So you might assign a variable to it. I mean, maybe that's it. But then we go into the Benkai scenario. If this person is, truly within what they consider a payload, or they consider themselves a secure private data person. I mean, you could maybe use the word person as a variable would be too extensive, but then it would be too secluse. It would be too inappropriate. It would be confusing, right? So there isn't really a word. You can use fake data, but then the stream of the idea of the data wouldn't be recorded as though the victim or the mass shooting had never taken place. Buy into their fears, buy into their facts, buy into their poison, but still terroristic in a way, but not exactly as Hollywood as you might see it or believe it. play, pause, kind of the same thing. Fast forward, kind of the same thing. Backwards, rewind, kind of the same thing, but is also a national concept or strategy, right? In a way, reverse osmosis, reversing time. I mean, they're all pretty much the similar things, but they don't have a novus of choice, which is your actions and your predestined action of what you want to choose in the future. So when you were in the victimization where someone says, do you want a showdown? Eh, ask him straight to his face, do you want to duel me? Or straight to your face, do you mean to kill me? Straight to your face, are you interrogating me? And if one definition we'll look up tonight is interrogation, and this was the last question today, we'll define interrogation for you. For the roots of ritual or whatever you want to call it, homeland security or anything, interrogation is a formal, systematic process of questioning a person suspected of wrongdoing, typically used by law enforcement, military personnel, or intelligence agents to elicit information or confessions. It differs from a standard interview because it is not adversarial, accusatory, and focused heavily on target in custody. Legal constitutional rules governed in the U.S. by the Fifth Amendment and Supreme Court ruling in Miranda versus Arizona, requiring police to inform suspects of their Miranda rights before custodial interrogation. Voluntariness, confessions obtained during physical force, overt threats, or coercion are legally inadmissible in courts. Scope includes both direct questioning and any words or actions by officers likely to elicit a incriminating response. The Reed technique, a 9-step accusatory method where an investigator presents a monologue, builds a psychological theme of moral justification, and handles denials to lead a suspect towards telling the truth. Non-accusatory information gathering models, non-accusatory approaches such as peace model focuses on ethical dialogue, report building, and uncovering facts through securing a confession. So what you can see there is it's pretty much defined as, not to hurt the potential foe or the interrogatee or the person interviewed. Formally, it is about the risk of saving lives, not about the impression you're giving, but they are saying this and they're doing this. The question becomes, imperative about mostly making things up at that point, making things up as a reason to be supportive in that nature, kind of like one of the Reed peace tactics. Tactics, we mean, touching as talk, communication, contact. Contact and tactic are mostly synonymous through time, mostly. So the potential there are, finding a way to lower reasoning, but to be sane, not to be insoluble or insult. You're finding a way to be sober. You're finding a way to find a reality that can be defined. So, right, you're quoting yourself. You're able to be quoted. You are not ending a situation in which is insignificant, insecure. Meaning you're leaving someone with information that is not seroprose, meaning they can quote you basically. Mostly. So up to a certain amount of points, right? Emotion, tasteful and non-tasteful emotions, fake drug dealing, saying, oh, whew, I'm sweaty today, or I'm so wet, or gosh, I shouldn't have said what I said, as though it's nonchalant, right? Or the imperative is functional. Whoa, I read so much today, I have no idea. We're getting tired last second, saying, oh man, I don't have enough to eat. And that has to do with maybe your freedom to own weapons, speak to people as a cook would, right? So potential is the same as water. I didn't have enough to drink. Do you have some water? Seems like getting DNA fingerprints. But so the principle keeps on going on and on and on. So I think we answered a lot of the questions tonight, and we went to 2 hours for this reason and all to prove this. But that was, what does it mean to be an undocumented, unofficial mass shooting victim? And I hope that helped, and I hope the ethical point does grow in the future. And I hope more relatable ideas and surrounding information comes about and says, oh yes, these two sound very similar, and there was no more of that. And it does seem like this and that are going together, and these things make more sense. But just not like in that statement, more professional. right? So don't make fun of me. Don't make fun of this episode of this show, live TV stream. That could be better in the future, but it does talk about the realities of what would happen if a undocumented, unofficial messaging took place to a person and they were to live their lives somewhat. So I mean, you'd have to check the other professional episodes about these ideas and how they work in the inner workings. So that's about it. Well, thank you for stay safe, stay peaceful, stay honest.